All right, what's up, gang? I want to talk about Tony Ferguson and what he has next. So this past weekend, it's like the 8th loss in a row that Tony suffered. It's probably the 6th in a row that I've put money on Tony and lost. It's hard to not root for Tony, especially coming up and watching everything Tony's gone through. He's never looked out of any of these fights. Now, I know I just walked into a joke where he got knocked unconscious by Michael Chandler, but I think you guys get the idea. He was never just completely just dominated. I felt like I saw a little bit of his age this past weekend. Yeah. But where I want to begin and what's got me making the video today about it is I watch a lot of Chael Sonnen. So I'm watching Chael Sonnen on my break a little bit ago, and he made one about Tony. And he's basically dogging Tony. He begins the first half being like, talking about how he knows Tony and doesn't wish anything bad on Tony. But then he's pissed off at Tony, and I see this angle. When Chiesa won, Chiesa ends up saying, he's like, this time's dedicated to Tony. Chiesa said everything he wanted to say in that moment, because he ends up being like, I'm going to give this mic to Tony. But thank you to my team, thank you to my wife, thank you to and he rattles off about a minute worth of stuff and gets his thank yous out, and then because Tony has already taken his gloves off. Like we see Tony standing there with his gloves off as they're announcing the winner, so it's like we all know it's gonna put the gloves down. It's kind of become a thing. Where did that come from, by the way? Like, I feel like that actually started in WWE. Could be wrong, but yeah. Then Tony gets handed the mic and he leaves one glove in the ring and says he's going to go talk it over with his family. Now, Chael went on a rampage and was like, it was rude of Tony to take Chiesa's moment. And then Chael ends up saying that at the post-fight presser, Tony acts like everyone in Abu Dhabi was there to see him, and that he's going to keep fighting, possibly in the PFL or something. As I'm saying this out loud, I get it. I get why Chael's mad. Chael's a UFC company boy from the best I can tell. He's real loyal to Dana, so he's like, don't you dare think of signing with anybody else. But he's basically trying to press him into retiring. The way Chael painted out that post-fight press conference is not what actually happened at all. I had to go and listen to it myself after that break, because I was like, man, I'm going to have to make a video about this. But I've been coming to find a lot of the people I listen to put out a lot of false information. Chael recently did over that female boxer. And we're not going to get into it because I made a video and I deleted it because I don't want to deal with arguing with people. But my whole thing on that female boxer, the Olympics as women boxing, an article started coming out saying there was a trans boxer in it. I first heard it on Joe Rogan, and I was infuriated. Then I go and look it up, and it's like, what Joe had said was incorrect. And on the same podcast, Joe's like talking about Trump coming out at the RNC to Mini Men by 50 Cent, which didn't really happen. Like, that was a joke someone made online. I'm like, oh man. Anyways, so Tony goes to the post-fight press conference. I listened to it myself just a little bit ago. Tony doesn't want to retire, in the sense he doesn't want to walk away from the fight game. And I felt like this was crystal clear what he was saying. Tony wants to continue working for the UFC in the manner of like how Forrest Griffin is doing it. Like Forrest Griffin, I don't know what his job title is, but Forrest Griffin works out at the PI and he like coaches. I think he does some strength training and stuff like that. But that's what Tony was talking about. And specifically, one thing I heard him say is sports psychologist. And I feel like Tony would be outstanding as a sports psychologist if he can keep his temper in check. That's something I feel like I can give good counseling advice. But then when someone just doesn't take it after 2 or 3 times, it's like I'm pissed off. And I'm like, all right, what the fuck? I can see Tony being like that. But it sounded exactly like what Tony was saying, is he's like, I'm going to keep getting better. He's like, I train in wrestling shoes and this and that. And he's basically, in one way or another, it sounded like he's trying to be respectful to the company that has him employed by right now and wants to work something out with them, that company being the UFC, but he doesn't honestly know what the options are. Like, he wants to do like Flow Grappling or whatever these other grappling tournaments are on Fight Pass, or he would like to coach like an Ultimate Fighter type thing, even if he wasn't fighting at the end of it, or if he had a grappling match at the end of it. But nowhere in that post-fight press conference did I feel like he said he's taking another fight. It's he still wants to be with the UFC. Like, he literally said, I still want to be with the UFC. This is my life. And I think he's like, whether that's coaching or sports psych, I don't know. He's like, I got to look at what the options are. And I feel like he would have been more definitive if he wasn't so smart, in the sense of, so like I rattle off Flow Grappling. I know Eddie Bravo has a tournament. IBJJ has a tournament. Some of these are going to be affiliated with the UFC and some of them aren't. So it's like, if he says the wrong one in that moment, it could really backfire on him. And I think that's why he's kind of like not quite saying, because he doesn't know exactly which avenue he has to go. But I look forward to it. I'll love having Tony around. Tony would be an outstanding Dean Thomas. You guys know who Dean Thomas is. In the middle of fights, they usually go to him about once or twice in the fight itself, while it's live, like while the round is ongoing, and they'll have a little picture of him in the corner, and he'll speak for about 20 or 30 seconds about what he's analyzed from the fight and what one or two pieces of advice he would give if he was in there. And he's a former fighter. Tony would be marvelous at that, especially once he's comfortable and has the freedom to talk how he does, where he's slightly entertaining and a little mysterious. Oh man, Tony would eat that up. But yeah, so going forward with Tony Ferguson, I think it seems pretty clear Tony's done fighting, but he's not done competing. And it's probably hard for him to say he's done fighting, because I could see him doing a boxing match if the right opportunity presented itself. And people are so hard on Tony. You got to understand everything Tony's been through and all the buildups and climaxes that didn't get to come because of, wow, don't make jokes on that. They just didn't occur because of just how the world played out. That was beyond his own thing. So when I say boxing, I don't think Tony's going to go try to box Jake Paul, or, you never know if the UFC doesn't give him an opportunity. I can see it. But I'd see Tony hanging on to the boxing for an opportunity to box someone like Khabib. I think a bunch of us would love to see Tony and Khabib box, especially if Khabib was willing to, and he's like, yeah, I can stand up and strike with him now. I think that would be something we would all love, as well as grappling or whatever else. But he's already been away from sparring for forever, and that was kind of a red flag to me going into it. When he started at this last press conference going into the fight, he was talking about sparring 120 hours, and not 120 hours. If he did 120 hours, I would be impressed. I would be like, yeah, all right, he's ready. But did he say 120 rounds? Like, I don't know. In a whole camp, that's not a lot. So you got to think, well, they're doing 5-minute rounds, so that can give you 12 rounds in an hour. Well, you got a break in there, so we'll say 11 rounds in an hour. So basically, in 10 or 11 hours, he's done all the sparring he can do for the camp. I don't know. When I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's not a lot, because I'd add up. Like, it was nothing for me to go and spar for about 2 hours straight. Now, mind you, there's a break between each round, and I probably take 1 to 2 rounds off, but for an hour and a half to 2 hours, like, that's fun. And that would be, I'm usually doing 3-minute rounds, so that would be like 60, but the 3-minute rounds changes it. If we made it 5, that'd be like 22 rounds in one session. So it's like, in a week's worth of training, I could get that in if I was really getting to have fun with people. But anyway, sorry, I was getting off track on that. he's already stepped away from sparring, so I think he's already recognizing damage that can happen mentally into our brain and with CTE and everything like that. And that was something else Chael was saying that had me worrying. He was like talking about his mental state. After everything we saw with Ryan Garcia, it's really fucked up that Chael's even talking like that about Tony. I don't know what his deal is. But yeah, I figure it sounds like Tony's done fighting. You might get a boxing match out of him if it's entertaining enough and with the right person. I bet he would box Conor too. He'd love to box Conor. But I think Tony's done. We'll get to see him in some grappling tournaments. I hope to God they let him be a sports psychologist. I feel like Tony would be outstanding as a sports psychologist. With all the shit he had to go through from being on The Ultimate Fighter and his team betraying him. When he tears his MCL, Dana throws him under the bus. Khabib ducks him 100 times. This dude just keeps taking fights with killers. Yeah. CSO, baby. 2 more wins and a belt.